On this vote, the yeas are 234, the nays are 185. The resolution is adopted without objection. A motion to reconsider is laid on the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks on and include extraneous material on H.R. 3590.
Without objection. Pursuant to House Resolution 470 and Rule 18, the Chair declares the House and the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for consideration of H.R. 3590. The Chair appoints the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Nugent, to preside over the Committee of the Whole.
Will the House come to order? Okay. The House is the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for consideration of H.R. 3590, which the clerk will report by title.
A bill to protect and enhance opportunities for recreational hunting, fishing, and shooting, and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the bill is considered read for the first time. The gentleman from Washington, Mr. Hastings, and the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. DeFazio, each will control 30 minutes. Will the House come to order? The committee come to order. Will members take their conversations off the floor so the committee can come to order? Will members take their conversations off the floor so the committee can come to order? The committee will come to order. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Recognized.
Mr. Chairman, the Sportsman's Heritage and Recreation Enhancement Act, H.R. 3590, is a package of 8 bills that protects the right of American sportsmen to fish and hunt from arbitrary and unjustified bureaucratic restrictions and limitations. It will remove government roadblocks to those activities on certain public lands and guard against new regulations that threaten hunting and fishing. Mr. Chairman, this is a bipartisan bill. It's co-sponsored by the Republican and Democrat chairs of the Congressional Sportsman Caucus, Mr. Latta of Ohio and Mr. Thompson of Mississippi, and the caucus vice chairs, Mr. Whitman of Virginia and Mr. Walz of Minnesota. In addition, Mr. Benishek of Michigan, Mr. Gibbs of Ohio, Mr. Hunter of California, Mr. Miller of Florida, and Mr. Young of Alaska all deserve credit for leadership on these important issues. Mr. Chairman, the House committee is not in order.
The gentleman is correct. The House will come to order. The committee will come to order. The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, this legislation ensures that Americans' ability to fish and hunt will not be arbitrarily limited by the whim of federal bureaucrats. Title I of this bill directly responds to bureaucratic threats posed by the EPA In 1976, Congress barred the Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, from regulating firearms and ammunition. However, this has not stopped attempts to circumvent the law by claiming that while EPA may not be able to regulate ammunition, it can regulate components of ammunition and fishing tackle. This would be a massive power grab by the EPA despite a clear lack of legal authority. Banning lead bullets and tackle would increase costs for hunters, sport shooters, and fishermen and cause economic harm to outdoor sportsmen and the recreation industry. This legislation ensures that the EPA does not, Mr. Chairman, have the authority to regulate ammunition and fishing. Title II of this bill makes more funding available to states for a longer period of time to create and maintain shooting ranges, which of course preserves American tradition. Title III would direct the Secretaries of Agriculture and Interior to allow, with a permit, commercial filming on federal lands for crews of 5 or fewer. This permit would ensure a fair return to the taxpayer in exchange for use of their lands. Title IV of this bill would allow for the importation of legally taken polar bear hunting trophies from Canada that, through no fault of the hunters or the sportsmen, have become trapped in a bureaucratic limbo. This is focused squarely on resolving existing permits installed in red tape and does not open the door to any future imports. The next two titles of the bill would allow sportsmen across the country to more easily obtain a federal duck stamp by making them available for purchase online, and would protect law-abiding individuals' constitutional right to bear arms on lands owned by the Army Corps of Engineers. Title VII establishes a Wildlife and Hunting Heritage Conservation Council Advisory Committee in order to protect the rights of sportsmen while finding a balance between common sense conservation. And the last title of the bill requires the federal land managers to support and facilitate use and access for hunting, fishing, and recreation shooting on Forest Service and BLM land. It protects sportsmen from arbitrary efforts by the federal government to block public lands from hunting and fishing activities by implementing an open until closed management policy. However, Mr. Chairman, it does not prioritize hunting and fishing over other multiple uses of public lands. Mr. Chairman, hunting, fishing, and recreational shooting are long-standing American traditions that deserve our protection. This important legislation is not a solution in search of a problem. Regrettably, bureaucratic threats to hunting, fishing, and recreational shooting that are very real. That is why this bill has broad bipartisan support and the endorsement from over 36 sportsmen's organizations. So I again commend the bipartisan sponsors of these packages of bills, and I encourage my colleagues to support the legislation. And with that, I reserve my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Oregon is recognized.
I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
In the past, I have voted for a number of sportsmen's promotion and protection packages. Unfortunately, it seems that this one, with a number of extraneous provisions and detrimental provisions to wilderness, wildlife refuges, and other areas, seems designed to turn what in the past has been a bipartisan consensus in favor of sportsmen's issues into a partisan issue, which is what we do with most everything around here these days, and that's unfortunate, because we'd be happy to address real problems as they're identified. In this bill, we're going to essentially amend or override the Wilderness Act, the National Environmental Policy Act, Refuge System Administration Act. These are all bedrock environmental provisions which protect public lands and wildlife, and have not caused conflicts for sportsmen, hunters and fishers and others. It also, we have the throwaway, little political thing. The EPA has already said we don't have the authority to regulate lead, and that's the end of it. But we're going to pass a law to say they don't have the authority that they don't have to regulate lead. Okay, whatever. That's fine. So then, we also have a very broad agreement that hunting, fishing, and other wildlife-dependent activities can and should and have and will ongoing take place in wildlife refuges and wilderness areas. In fact, there's so much agreement on this point that existing law clearly supports such activities. As a result, hunting and fishing are popular and commonplace pursuit on public lands, the vast majority of which, outside of national parks in the lower 48, are open to hunting and fishing. Now, reasonable legislation seeking simply to emphasize the importance of these activities would have been non-controversial, and whatever minor adjustments we might need to make. But to have a blanket exemption for operations in the National Wildlife Refuge system from all environmental planning under NEPA, purpose of such a broad waiver is unclear. The motivation is unclear. It's definitely and potentially, or at least probably very, can't say definitely, but it could well undermine management in refuges in ways that will actually degrade habitat, which will mean less hunting and fishing opportunities, degrade water, which means less hunting and fishing opportunities, and that seems contradictory to the meritorious title of the bill, which doesn't seem to be reflected in the various parts, some of which have been through hearings, some of which haven't. Now, the filming on public lands, I haven't heard of the controversy. There's some who purport that there might be some kind of problem for people who want to do hunting, fishing, videos, films. I've seen quite a few of them on public lands. There is no example of a problem that has occurred, but the new authority with a fixed rate of a maximum of $200 for a permit, no matter how much the impact might be of the film crew, and further, to open the door for the use of motorized equipment in wilderness areas for these filming activities is very, very problematic and objectionable and unnecessary at this point. Again, there's been nothing brought up in a hearing about a credible complaint from a film company that couldn't do its wildlife film or its hunting film because of restrictions that were placed upon them. It also would allow the construction of temporary roads. Now, I appreciate the fact the manager's amendment is going to prohibit permanent roads within wilderness areas that are designated necessary for access for hunting and fishing, but even temporary roads in wilderness areas, for hunting and fishing are a clear and unnecessary degradation, a violation of the existing Wilderness Act. And many, horseback hunters or hunters who access on foot in my state, I've never been, petitioned by them to open up roads into wilderness areas so they can better hunt. They are concerned about the ongoing review and closure of roads by the Forest Service, and I've been actively involved in that. But in this case, we're saying, no, now we can have temporary roads into wilderness areas, something that no one has ever asked me and nor made a case as necessary for hunting. So it is slightly improved from the early versions, but we're still concerned about temporary roads. And that's not something we want in our wilderness areas. I don't think that weakening or changing the definition of wilderness helps expand access for hunting and fishing, nor the opportunities in those areas. The bill has some pretty glaring omissions that actually would tremendously benefit the sportsmen's communities. That would be programs that support wetlands conservation, the preservation of outdoor recreation facilities, North American Wetlands Conservation Act, Land and Water Conservation Fund, which are key in expanding opportunities or protecting continued opportunities to hunt and fish as we see more and more urban encroachment onto traditional hunting and fishing areas. We could use those tools. We need those tools. They're both expired, and they are not allowed to be part of this package. There were various other amendments offered that we will get to later in the discussion that were not allowed that could have improved this package. So, we will go through the amendment process, try and deal with some of the concerns, but, at this point, as written and introduced, I would urge my colleagues to oppose this bill. I would reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
I'd like to yield 2 minutes to my colleague, the gentleman from Alaska, Mr. Young.
Gentleman from Alaska is recognized for 2 minutes.
Unanimous consent provide and extend.
Without objection.
I'm interested in Title IV in this legislation, which is a good piece of legislation. The provision in Title IV of 3590 has the support of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the President of the United States. This provision is the Polar Bear Conservation and Fairness Act. It's a bipartisan measure that would make a very limited fix to an issue that affects a number of hunters nationwide. Prior to the threatened listing of the worldwide polar bear population on May 15, 2008, there were a number of hunters that took hunting trips to Canada under Canadian law and United States law. These hunters followed all the rules at the time and were prevented from bringing in their polar bear trophy due to the threatened listing triggering an importation ban under the Marine Mammal Protection Act. The legislation, my legislation, the 3590, will allow the Secretary of Interior to issue permits to only those qualified hunters with legally taken polar bear trophies prior to the May listing dates. This legislation will allow up to 41 hunters to import their trophies from Canada. As a result, roughly 41,000 would be available to the United States, Russia, Polar Bear Conservation Fund to support conservation activities for the share of polar bear population. This provision that would bring in reserve for conservation activities that otherwise would not be funded. As a result, I urge the members to support this legislation and keep in fact these are dead polar bears in storage, hunted legally under the premise of Canadian law and United States law. This is a good part of this bill, and by the way, speaking of this bill, it is a good bill. From the state of Alaska has more parks and more refuges than any other state. The Refuge Department doesn't allow to hunt on refuges in many areas. Park Service definitely don't allow us to hunt. And I'm arguing that this park and refuge areas are set aside for the refuge managers themselves and not for the people of America, let alone the people of Alaska. This legislation is the right way to go. Let's think about public lands, not the king's lands, not the administration lands, but the lands of the people. This bill is a good bill. I urge the passage of this legislation.
The committee will rise informally to receive a message.
The House will be in order. The Chair will receive a message.
Mr. Speaker, a message from the President of the United States.
Mr. Speaker,
Mr. Secretary,
I am directed by the President of the United States to deliver to the House of Representatives a message in writing.
the committee will resume its sitting.
The committee will be in order. The gentleman from Oregon is recognized.
I'd yield the gentleman from Mississippi, co-chair of Sportsman's Caucus, as much time as he might consume.
The gentleman from Mississippi is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And let me thank the ranking member of the committee, the gentleman from Oregon, for allowing me to speak in support of this legislation, even though he has reserved time in opposition. Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of H.R. 3590, the Sportsman Heritage and Recreational Enhancement Act of 2013. Today's bill is the product of the work of members of the bipartisan Congressional Sportsman's Caucus, which I serve as co-chair. The Congressional Sportsman's Caucus is the largest caucus in Congress, boasting nearly 300 members. The caucus seeks to advance hunting, angling, shooting, and trapping legislative priorities. Today's bill is comprised of 8 individual bills that seek to promote these interests. Mr. Speaker, not only is hunting and fishing a great passion for millions of individuals like myself, it is also a major contributor to the U.S. economy. Mississippi, home to some of the world's finest duck, whitetail, and sport fishing, contributed $2.2 billion to the economy in 2011 alone. My congressional district receives scores of visitors each year, including some members of this body who come to enjoy the vast natural resources that the Mississippi Delta has to offer. When these individuals visit Mississippi, they hire local outfitters, stay in our hotels, eat at our restaurants, pay state hunting fees, and purchase hunting gear like Primo's brand hunting calls, which are produced in my district in Flora, Mississippi. In fact, it has been estimated that hunting and fishing supports 33,000 jobs in Mississippi. Mr. Speaker, the bill before us today makes improvements to a wide range of issues, including the ability to purchase duck stamps online, statutorily established the Wildlife Hunting and Heritage Conservation Council, which was administratively formed by Secretaries Salazar and Vilsack in 2012. It also reduces the financial burden on states and local governments for target range construction and maintenance. Also, it excludes commercial ammo and fishing tackle from being classified as toxic substances, which the EPA has agreed. It also directs the Secretary of the Interior and the Secretary of Agriculture to issue a permit and assess an annual fee for commercial filming crews of 5 people or fewer for activities on federal lands and waterways administered by the Secretary. It also allows law-abiding citizens to transport firearms across Army Corps of Engineers projects like the hundreds of miles of levee that I have in my district. It also opens more federal land to hunting and fishing. Mr. Speaker, while this bill makes tremendous strides to advance the needs of sportsmen, there are several other provisions that were not included in this bill that we must continue to push for, and including an overhaul of the red snapper management of the Gulf of Mexico, the ability to convert decommissioned oil rigs to fish habitat, and the reauthorization of the Land and Water Conservation Fund. I look forward to working with my colleagues to also address these issues. Mr. Speaker, I urge my colleagues to join me in supporting H.R. 3590, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Thank you. I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Whitman.
Gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise today to offer my support for H.R. 3590, the Sportsman's Heritage and Recreational Enhancement Act of 2013, better known as the SHARE Act. And I commend my friend and co-chair of the Congressional Sportsmen's Caucus, Representative Bob Latta of Ohio, for his leadership in guiding this bill to the floor. I'm also proud to join with the Sportsmen's Caucus co-chairs, both Representative Latta, Representative Betty Thompson of Mississippi, and Vice Chair Representative Tim Walz of Minnesota in support of this important bill. As a member of the Natural Resources Committee, I would also like to thank Chairman Doc Hastings for his work in cooperation on behalf of America's sportsmen to support this legislation through the committee process. As a sportsman, I am humbled to advocate for this community and help introduce this legislation to advance priorities for American anglers, hunters, and conservationists. This common-sense package will expand opportunities for recreation, support fair treatment, and modernize programs for sportsmen, and includes a proposal I authored to allow migratory waterfowl hunters to purchase their annual federal duck stamp online. As Vice Chair of the Congressional Sportsmen's Caucus, I can proudly say that this provision is important to waterfowl hunters across the country. Title V, the Permanent Electronic Duck Stamp Act, is supported by the Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation and Ducks Unlimited. I would also like to acknowledge Representative Ron Kind as an original co-sponsor of the Permanent Electronic Duck Stamp Act. The gentleman from Wisconsin is a dedicated conservation and longtime supporter and friend to sportsmen. There is no cost to taxpayers, and there is broad bipartisan support for this innovative idea, and this convenient 21st century delivery system will be utilized by thousands of American sportsmen in the future. Again, I would encourage my colleagues to support this important package, H.R. 3590, the Sportsman's Heritage and Recreational Enhancement Act. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Oregon is recognized.
Just inquires how much time on either side.
The gentleman has 19.5 minutes remaining. The gentleman from Michigan has 21.5 minutes remaining.
I'd grant the gentleman from California, Mr. Farr, 5 minutes.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I rise today in opposition to this legislation, and I would hope that my colleagues will read it, look before they leap. It's called the Sportsman's Heritage and Recreational Enhancement Act of 2013. But unfortunately, it's mired in a muck of text in the legislation that I think does just the opposite of enhancement. It ought to read, it Kill the Habitat and Wildlife and Enjoy a Dead Forest Act. This bill diminishes the conservation measures designed to protect the habitat for wildlife by creating loopholes in the Wilderness Act and weakens the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA process. Title I, for example, amends the Toxic Substance Control Act to prohibit the EPA from regulating toxic substances contained in bullets, angling lures, and other hunting equipment with respect to toxic substances. Toxic substances. It's not just people that are affected by toxic substance, so are animals. And here they prohibit barring lead in bullets. Now, California is a big hunter state. And guess what? California state law prohibits the use of lead. Why? Because the federal government has spent millions, millions, and millions of dollars trying to restore the California condor. Does that count? Well, ask the Ventana and Post Ranch Inns. Post Ranch is $1,000 a night. Nobody can afford that, but it's filled all the time. Why? Because you can see condors and mountain lions and sea otters and other things that we've protected by protecting their environment. Now, what does a condor die from? It eats dead things. It eats things that have been killed by bullets. And it eats that lead, and guess what? It kills the condor. It's done it over and over again. There's no question about this. This is the #1 cause of death in condors in California after we spent all this money trying to get them restored. This act wipes all that out. It's going to hurt the economy. And you know what? People call themselves sportsmen. Sportsmen I know don't want to kill the wildlife by poison or destroying the habitat. That's why the bill passed in California, banning lead bullets. And this one prohibits states like California from doing that. You know, even the military is moving toward pursuing a lead-free environment for their small arms. So it's a serious problem. And this bill bans that. This is nuts. Lead poisoning from ammunition is the way you kill off wildlife. Not by a good shot. You kill it off by the poison that's left behind. And that's why Governor Brown signed into law a ban on lead bullets. And they phase it in to 2019. This allows at least 30 other states, follows what at least 30 other states have already done in regulating lead ammunition in some manner. So if we want to really protect and enhance the environment, then we ought to do what the original conservationists did. Who were the hunters? By switching to non-toxic ammunition and allow them to continue on good conservation efforts, which is a heritage of hunters in this country. So this legislation is a step backwards for a sportsman. I'm a fisherman. I certainly don't want to put stuff in the ocean or in lakes that is toxic. And conservation practices that protect our public lands, our open spaces, and our wilderness areas. So I urge my colleagues to look before you leap. Don't jump in and just because there's a bunch of people endorsing this bill, look at the type, look what it does, look at the small print. And I urge you to oppose this legislation until it can really be legislation that will be a sportsman's heritage and a recreational enhancement act. As now, it deserves your opposition.
The gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
I'd like to yield myself 2 minutes of the time.
The gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I rise today in support of H.R. 3590, the Sportsman's Heritage and Recreational Enhancement Act of 2013, or the SHARE Act. I'd like to talk a little bit about Title VIII of this bill, which is the text of a bill that I introduced, the Recreational Fishing and Hunting Heritage and Opportunities Act. Like many of my colleagues here in Congress, hunting and fishing are an important part of the lives of the constituents in my district. I grew up in northern Michigan, and like many of my constituents, spent my summers fishing, my Octobers hunting grouse in the UP woods. These traditions, spending quality time outdoors with our kids and grandkids, are the kind of things that we must make sure are preserved for generations to come. Mr. Chairman, this portion of the SHARE Act seeks to create an open until closed policy for sportsmen's use of federal lands. As you know, nearly a quarter of the United States landmass, or over 500 million acres, are managed by the Bureau of Land Management, the Fish and Wildlife Service, and the Forest Service. These lands are all owned by all Americans. It is important that the right to fully utilize these lands is ensured for future generations. Over the years, legislative ambiguity in the Wilderness Act has opened the door for numerous lawsuits across the country. Rather than embracing sportsmen and women for the conservationists that they are, anti-hunting and environmental groups have pursued an agenda of eliminating heritage activities on federal lands for years. These groups look for loopholes in the law to deprive our constituents the right to use their own federal lands. Recreational anglers, hunters, and sporting organizations, many of whom have endorsed this bill, are supporters of the conservation movement and continue to provide direct support to the wildlife managers and enforcement officers at the state, local, and federal level. These dedicated sportsmen and women, from the shorelines of Lake Superior to the beaches of the Pacific Ocean, deserve to know that the lands that they cherish will not be closed off to future generations. This is a bipartisan issue. In fact, Presidents Clinton and Bush both issued executive orders recognizing the value of these heritage activities. It is time we finally close these loopholes, firm up the language, and make sure that future generations will always be able to enjoy the outdoors, hunting, fishing, and shooting, or just taking a walk in the woods. I will yield myself another 15
Gentleman's
seconds.
recognized.
I would encourage all my colleagues today to join me in supporting this important piece of common sense legislation and yield back the remainder of my time.
Gentleman, does the gentleman reserve his time?
Right. Absolutely.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Oregon is recognized.
Oh, I misplaced what I was going to say. How many more speakers does the gentleman have?
I have 6 more, Mr. Chairman.
6 more. Well, I'd suggest that I have no more except myself, so I'd suggest that the gentleman go ahead.
Reserve?
I would reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Then I'd yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Wyoming, Mr. Daines. Oh.
The gentleman from Montana is recognized for 2 minutes.
Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise today in support of H.R. 3590, the SHARE Act. As a fifth-generation Montanan and a lifelong sportsman, I know that hunting, fishing, motorized recreation, and hiking is simply a way of life for us in Montana. The outdoors is a critical aspect of our culture. And as 30% of our state is owned by the federal government, we depend on responsible stewardship and public access to these lands. And unfortunately, our federal government too often imposes rules and regulations that prevent responsible land use and our freedom to use the land that we pay for. Roughly 2 million acres in Montana are inaccessible to the public. That's the most of any state in the nation. Many of our hunting and fishing opportunities are locked away. The SHARE Act is an important bill that will protect Montanans' access to public lands for outdoor recreation. And too often, the federal government forgets that it's hunters, anglers, outdoorsmen, those whose livelihoods and passions rely on the land, that they respect our outdoor landscape the most and are the best stewards of our public lands. And here we have the federal government trying to expand its authority over lead bullets. keeping millions of dollars spent on ammo and fishing tackle by hunters and anglers from being used for the conservation and wildlife management. Like a Senate counterpart, the SPORT Act, this bill would protect our sportsmen and industries that manufacture these goods from these unnecessary regulations. The SHARE Act would also protect our Second Amendment rights, where the administration has tried to constrain them. It ensures that state and local governments are consulted in decisions managing shooting ranges, and ensures that real outdoorsmen, instead of a bunch of Washington bureaucrats, are advising the administration on conservation of sportsman issues. Simply stated, the SHARE Act is an important bill to protect America's outdoor heritage and ensure the responsible use of our public lands. I urge passage of this bill. I yield back my time.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
I'd like to yield at this time 2 minutes to the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Latta.
The gentleman from Ohio is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Mr. Chairman, I rise today in support of H.R. 3590, the Sportsman's Heritage and Recreational Enhancement Act, or SHARE Act. I have introduced this legislation on behalf of the Congressional Sportsmen's Caucus, of which I am a co-chairman, with Congressman Benny Thompson, of whom I thank for his work. I also would like to thank Chairman Hastings for his support of the various bills contained in the Sportsman's Package, as well as Chairman Schuster and Chairman Upton. I would also like to thank all of my colleagues that have introduced the individual bills that make up this package legislation. As a lifelong hunter and outdoorsman, issues relating to hunting and conservation are extremely important to me. This legislation includes various pro-sportsmen and pro-sportswomen's items that will help ensure our outdoor traditions are protected and advanced. H.R. 3590 also addresses some of the most current concerns of America's hunters, recreational anglers, shooters, and trappers. Title III of the bill is legislation I introduced related to public lands filming. This provision directs the Secretary of the Interior and the Secretary of Agriculture for any film crew of 5 persons or fewer to require, permit, and assess an annual fee of $200 for commercial filming, activities, or similar projects on federal lands and waterways administered by the Secretary. This prohibits the Secretary for persons holding such a permit from assessing any additional fee for commercial filming activities and similar projects that occur in those areas during public hours. I have also introduced the language contained in Title VII, which permanently establishes the Wildlife Hunting and Heritage Conservation Council Advisory Committee. This council advises the Secretary of Interior and Agriculture on wildlife and habitat conservation, recreational hunting, and shooting. Authorization of the council is vital to ensuring that hunters maintain an advisory capacity role across future administrations. Passage of H.R. 3590 will not only elevate the stature of the council, it will also provide the levels of certainty and stability necessary to ensure the council's ability to engage in assisting the government in devising and implementing the innovative long-term solutions that are often necessary.
I'll yield to another, Mr. Latta,
30
in a minute.
Gentleman's recognized for another 30 seconds.
Thank you very much. Long-term solutions that are often necessary to address policy issues important to sportsmen and sportswomen. The passage of H.R. 3590 is important to our sportsmen and women to allow open access to federal lands, as well as to provide needed certainty for the rules surrounding these activities. These hunters and anglers provide a tremendous economic benefit to our country. In 2011, they spent over $90 billion. In my home state of Ohio, sportsmen and sportswomen spent $2.85 billion on hunting and fishing. That is more than the revenues for corn, the state's top grossing agricultural commodity that year. H.R. 3590 is good for the sporting and conservation communities, and I urge my colleagues to support the bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Oregon is recognized.
Yield myself such time as I may consume. If Mr. Latta would remain on the floor for a moment, Mr. Latta, if you would, I'll yield you some time. I'd like to direct a question about the filming provision, because it seems I'm curious what problems specifically have been identified regarding filming permits, and the second question would be, is it the gentleman's intent that they should be able to use mechanized filming, on tracks and otherwise motorized filming in wilderness areas? With that, I yield to the gentleman.
I appreciate the gentleman for yielding. And first, there's a lot of smaller companies out there that don't have the large film crews. and they don't have the large backup when it comes to funding to be able to do these types of activities. So we want to make sure that those individuals have that ability to be out there and with a smaller fee so they can go ahead and make the films that they want to make.
Well, reclaiming my time for a moment, as I understand the current process, the fees are, there is not one large fee. The fees vary in terms of the agency. I mean, if it's a one-person crew or a four-person crew or whatever, the fees would be smaller, and if it's a, you know, if it's a mega film coming from Hollywood, they would charge a larger fee, is my understanding. And if so, I'm just wondering if there has been a specific case, you know, where someone has come to the gentleman and said, gee, we're a two-person crew and they want to charge us $10,000. Do we have any specific examples? I'd yield to the gentleman.
Well, I thank the gentleman for yielding. Again, what we've had come to us from the discussions we had with the sporting community. And again, this is a product of multiple groups coming together, and this is you know, when we looked at the cost, the fee, et cetera, they thought it would be appropriate at this level at $200 for the annual fee, again, for these very small groups out there that want to go out and film.
Okay, and further, is the issue of mechanized filming equipment, you know, motorized, being used in wilderness areas?
Well, that is one of the, that's one of the sections in the title. That would permit that.
You feel that we should waive the Wilderness Act for film crews, but not other activities?
Well, you know, and it's a gentleman. I thank the gentleman for yielding. Again, you know, when you're looking at mechanized vehicle, it could be anything from a very small ATV. And might not be talking about a truck or something like that, but something very small.
Okay. Well, thank you. In reclaiming my time.
Thanks for the gentleman for yielding.
I think that this is a solution in search of a problem. We have had no testimony before the committee, and no specifics were provided here, and I believe it's an overly broad provision. If we had cases where extortionate fees were being charged for small groups or unreasonable fees that weren't following the scaling basis that the agency tells me they follow, then I would share the gentleman's concerns. With that, I'd reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Michigan.
At this time, I'd like to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Miller.
Gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the chairman. I thank Chairman Hastings for support in including H.R. 322, the Hunting, Fishing, and Recreational Shooting Protection Act, as Title I of this sportsman's package. And I want to thank my Congressional Sportsman's Caucus colleagues and the leadership, Chairman Bob Latta and Benny Thompson, their efforts to protect sportsmen's right and preserve our nation's heritage. Now, Title I of this measure simply clarifies the existing intent of law regarding EPA's authority under the Toxic Substance Control Act with respect to traditional ammunition and fishing tackle that contain lead components. This legislation would prevent EPA from expanding its regulatory authority under TSCA into an area where fish and wildlife agencies are better positioned to manage. What the several anti-hunting and anti-fishing groups who insist on the expansion fail to recognize is that the ammunition, the firearms, the tackle industries, along with sportsmen and women, are the ones that are footing the bill to manage, protect, and create the same species habitat that they claim they're trying to save. There is no sound evidence of traditional ammo and fishing tackle with lead components causing harm to wildlife populations or human health that would warrant a complete ban. I would also say that one of my colleagues came to the floor earlier and said that this particular piece of legislation would in fact prevent states like California from banning lead ammunition. That is not true. Doing so in disregard of the intent of the law, EPA would devastate countless domestic manufacturing facilities, drive up the cost for law enforcement and for our military, destroying thousands of jobs and hurting wildlife conservation funding, all at the expense of the taxpayer. And that is a cost that should not be borne. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Oregon.
If the gentleman would remain on the floor for a moment, Mr. Miller. Sir? Mr. Miller. I guess he doesn't want to remain on the floor. Okay. I was going to direct a question to him, which is, since The EPA has found it does not have legal authority to legislate these substances. Why do we need to pass a law to prevent a law from being passed, which I guess is what we're trying to do here? In case we wanted to ever consider a law to do this, we'd say, well, we've already passed a law to prohibit that. Because the EPA says they don't have the authority to do this. It's not going to happen. There was a petition filed. It was rejected. End of story. With that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Michigan.
At this time, I'd like to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Schuster.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the gentleman, and Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of H.R. 3590, the Sportsman's Heritage and Recreational Enhancement Act. The bill protects the Second Amendment rights of visitors to the Army Corps recreation lands. The Army Corps of Engineers has more outdoor recreation visitors than the National Park Service or the Forest Service lands. My district is home to many of these recreational lands, such as Lake Raystown or the Youghiogheny River. While we currently have protections for American Second Amendment rights in national park lands and forest lands, that same right does not protect our Corps properties, and this bill corrects that. It removes unnecessary firearm restrictions while maintaining the safety and security of Corps buildings and properties. I urge all members to support the Second Amendment and vote in favor of H.R. 3590, the Sportsman's Heritage and Recreational Enhancement Act, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back.
Bill,
the gentleman from Oregon.
I yield myself such time as I may consume. I'd like to ask my chairman a question regarding that, since this is under the jurisdiction of our committee, and I'm not aware that we held a hearing on this issue. Did we yield?
I don't believe we did this year, but I think in the past we did.
And the gentleman said that this would not. I have many core areas in my district, and I'm reclaiming my time, and I'm not aware of restrictions, except there are restricted areas because a number of these projects have sensitive equipment that operates spillways and dams and other things, and those are high security areas post 9/11. And I'm wondering if the gentleman's interpretation of this is that it would allow people to carry sidearms into these high security areas. I'd yield to the gentleman.
It protects people's rights, to, just like on the state forests and the other properties of the federal government, to carry firearms on law-abiding citizens. So I think it's something reasonable and something I support. But I thank the gentleman for the inquiry.
Well, I think I'm reclaiming my time. You know, I'm a strong supporter of the Second Amendment and a gun owner myself, and I'm not aware of, I haven't had a single complaint about Corps restrictions in my state, you know, and that would include areas where we have had tampering with machinery that relates to spillways and dams, potential terrorism, and I wouldn't want to facilitate terrorism by saying, well, you know, if we're talking about general Corps areas and lands managed, fine. But if we're talking about sensitive, secure areas that have to be protected and guarded, I don't see why we would allow civilian firearm carry within those sensitive, protected areas, which would make us vulnerable to terrorism. Terrorists without a weapon, I suppose they could bring in a weapon anyway. They can violate the law. But if someone were noted bringing a weapon into one of those areas now, they would be asked to leave or apprehended. So I'm concerned about those aspects, and I think that my committee and Homeland Security should have looked at this issue before it was brought to the floor without a hearing. With that, I'd retain the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from Michigan.
I'd like to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Gibbs.
The gentleman from Ohio is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I rise in support of H.R. 3590, the Sportsman's Heritage and Recreational Enhancement Act of 2013. I would like to speak specifically to Title VI of the bill. The fundamental constitutional right to bear arms must be protected for all law-abiding citizens. Americans deserve the right to exercise their rights to not only enjoy recreational activities, but also to provide self-defense for themselves and their loved ones. In the 111th Congress, this body passed legislation that ultimately became law, which allows for guns to be legally possessed and carried on lands within our national parks. Following the enactment of that legislation, the Army Corps of Engineers immediately issued the following release. Public Law 111-024 does not apply to Corps projects or facilities. The passage of this new law does not affect application of Title 36 regulations. The Corps administers over 11.7 million acres of land, including 400 lakes and rivers projects, 90,000 campsites, and 4,000 miles of trails. Much of this land is remote and without quick access to emergency services or law enforcement, so the ability to carry a firearm in the case of emergency is imperative. This Army Corps policy preempts state regulatory frameworks for transporting and carrying firearms, thus invalidating concealed carry weapons permits and other state laws that allow law-abiding citizens to exercise their Second Amendment rights. Title VI of the bill is aimed at protecting these rights by ensuring the right of carry at U.S. Army Corps of Engineers water resource development projects. Specifically, this legislation prohibits the Secretary of the Army from enforcing any regulation that prevents an individual from possessing firearms on these properties, thereby restoring the continuity to federal law. Gun owners need to be able to exercise their Second Amendment rights when they are legally camping, hunting, and fishing in an Army Corps project. I'd like to thank my colleague from Ohio, Representative Latta, for including my bill into this piece of legislation. And I urge members to support Title VI and this legislation in the whole. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Oregon.
Inquire how many more speakers?
We just have one more speaker.
So that'll be your closing speaker, or you're going to close?
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to close after that.
So you're counting yourself as one? Or one more? Because I will go just before you close.
I have one more speaker, and then I'm going to close.
Okay, so I will go. I would reserve at this point.
Gentleman from Michigan.
I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from California, Mr. Hunter.
Gentleman from California is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank the gentleman and the ranking member and the committee as well for putting in the H.R. 2463, the Target Practice and Marksmanship Training Support Act that Congressman Walz from Minnesota and myself wrote. Basically, what this does is it allows Americans to use federal lands that they pay for in order to go out and shoot for sport, to have practice ranges and target ranges, and with fewer rangers today, providing greater flexibility to states for the purpose of maintaining public shooting venues, and it will go a long way to restoring the recreational opportunities and promoting gun safety. In San Diego, there are no public ranges that we can go use. We have to go to an indoor range, or we have to go to someone's private ranch. There are no more public facilities. The Target Practice and Marksmanship Training Support Act uses existing resources to allow Americans greater access to lands on which to safely practice recreational and competitive shooting. Shooting sports participants already provide significant support to conservation efforts through the excise taxes on firearms and ammunition, and public shooting ranges will continue to serve the interests of families and communities, providing a safe place for target practice and instruction while also sustaining jobs and supporting local businesses. This is a great bill. It's a great overall bill. I would urge my colleagues to support it because shooting and shooting well is an American tradition, and you shouldn't just have to join the Marine Corps to learn that. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Oregon.
I thank the Chair. I would agree with the gentleman and appreciate that came out of committee unanimously. It is a true bipartisan proposal, and I learned to shoot through the Y in a basement range with 22. That was where I started. So anyway, we've got to learn somewhere, and the public lands is another place for families to go and learn to shoot. So that's one of the non-controversial parts of the bill. In fact, 4 of the components of this bill could have been brought up under suspension or even, I believe, unanimous consent yesterday. Definitely under suspension. They definitely would have passed and been previously considered by committee, been subject to hearings, and the language was agreed upon. Unfortunately, the majority has insisted, although I also believe that the title would get unanimous consent in this body. It's a great title, but sometimes we attach provisions to great titles that aren't necessary or belie that title. And some of the components of this, which I've talked about, and the potential for degradation of wetlands management, wildlife refuge management, intrusions into wilderness areas that are inappropriate, are unnecessary. That's, we can do a little political gotcha. You voted against this bill that, has this great title, so that means you're against sportsmen and fishing and, hunters and families, enjoying those activities. I'm not, and very few, if any, members of this body are. But be that as it may, we've pointed out a number of the problems in this legislation. Legislating is really a pretty difficult exercise, to do real things, to do things that actually would benefit, our wildlife resources and hunting and fishing activities. One would be Congressman Daines' proposal to reauthorize the Land Water Conservation Fund. Every day, development proposals move forward that take more and more wildlife areas, more and more wetlands, more and more, forests out of access to hunting and fishing and recreation in many cases. The Land and Water Conservation Fund has been a key in protecting those lands when jeopardized and purchasing from willing sellers to prevent that kind of development. The bill, although we're still collecting the tax that funds the Land and Water Conservation Fund, yes, we are collecting the tax. Even the Republicans haven't proposed that we do away with that tax, because they're spending Land and Water Conservation Funds on other things. God only knows what. Some of the earmarks that a bill will take up later this week, I don't know. But they're spending hundreds of millions of dollars that are supposed to go to benefit sportsmen and women, hunters, fishers, wildlife, and protect those areas and manage them reasonably with the full access. They are spending that money somewhere else. So they don't want to take away the tax, but they don't want to reauthorize the Land Water Conservation Fund. That's a shame, and that would be much bigger benefit than anything else we're doing here today. We have a number of bipartisan wilderness proposals pending. Mr. Reichert from Washington State, Alpine Lakes, Mr. Benishek, Sleeping Bear Dunes, and others that are pending. Those things would benefit since wilderness does allow hunting and fishing and does provide a degree of protection for those lands that is unparalleled. That would be an experience for, horseback hunters, people who will walk in on their own 2 feet. But, there's plenty of places to go in a motorized way. It's a little more rare to have an opportunity to do that from horseback or hiking. But we're not considering those today because those are controversial. So instead, we have this kind of hash that we're calling one thing and doing a number of other things with. We have the proposal that we have a problem with unidentified film crews who have never come forward, who might be charged too much or need to use motorized equipment in wilderness areas, and so therefore we're just going to open them up. That is kind of a heck of a way to legislate, really. We're going to, we're worried that maybe some units and definitely the dam areas of the Corps of Engineers prohibit individuals carrying weapons. That's not exactly an intrusion. You can't carry a weapon into an airport. You can't carry a weapon into the Capitol. You can't carry a weapon into a federal courthouse. And you can't carry a weapon to a dam site where tampering with equipment could cause a massive flood or dam failure. It makes a little bit of sense to me, but the bill says, no, that's an infringement on the Second Amendment. I think it's a reasonable step by the government. So we're going to open that up, again, without any hearings, identifying any problems with access. I have a lot of Corps projects in my state. I've never had a constituent call and say, gee, I want to go onto this Corps property and bring my gun. I've got a concealed weapons permit, and I've carried, a gun on many federal lands, and there is no restriction, and I supported the park provisions last year. But we're creating another imaginary problem so we can add yet another title to this, this hash of a bill. I'm sorry that, we're having to go forward in this way. I did support a less controversial measure for sportsman heritage in the last Congress, and even that didn't go anywhere in the Senate. This one already has an affirmed veto threat from the White House, and the Senate isn't going to take it up. But we can pretend we did something here today, and some people get excited about the fact that we did something here today that will never happen. We could, and it's much harder, agree on a bipartisan measure for reasonable measures
to protect people's right to hunt and fish and bear arms, but we're not going to do that. So let's get on with the political show. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The gentleman from Washington is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield myself the balance of the time.
Gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Chairman, let me just make a couple of points. I want to make a very, very broad point on what the intent of this legislation is, because it's aimed at uses of public lands. Now, I have always been of the mind that public lands, particularly federal lands, should be used, unless Congress designates otherwise, then the uses of those lands should be for multiple purposes. Now, obviously, recreation, i.e. hunting and fishing, would be part of that. And so what this bill seeks to do then is to provide certainty into federal laws that indeed multiple uses, in this case hunting and fishing or recreational use, will be on public lands. It's nothing really more complicated than that. And what has caused this legislation to be brought forward is because of actions of certain bureaucracies within certain parts of the federal government that have a different decision, if you will, or a different idea of that, and they slow down this recreational activity. So this seeks to put certainty in that. And lastly, let me just respond to the arguments that we heard about the Land and Water Conservation Fund. Mr. Chairman, that is a program. There are people that think it's a very, very good program. There are those that, including me, that feel that sometimes it is not as good as it is, simply because you acquire private land for the federal government. We can't maintain what we have. I mean, that should be a reason for, I guess, pause anyway. But the reason I think that the Rules Committee did not make that particular amendment in order is for a very, very good reason. We talk about regular order around here. The Land and Water Conservation Fund statute does not expire until 2015. So I know, as Chairman of the House Natural Resources Committee, that the subcommittee in charge of that particular legislation is going to have hearings, and we're going to go through the legislative process in order to reauthorize that. So to rail against the idea that that amendment was not made in order somehow continues to break the program is simply not the case. The program is in place until it expires at the end in 2015, and I have no doubt that our committee will come up with legislation to do the proper reauthorization. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I think it's a very, very good bill, and I urge my colleagues to support it, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. All time for general debate has expired. Pursuant to the rule, the bill shall be considered for amendment under the 5-minute rule and shall be considered as read. No amendment